What's up, YouTube? Welcome to the Counting Wisdom podcast. I think one thing that we don't really think about in regards to money is that I don't think there is really enough out there. And I think sometimes it is a sort of a facade when you look at trying to reach a certain income. I do think that, yes, some people are able to start a business and, have it be successful. But, even if you weren't necessarily to become an entrepreneur, when you think about how many positions there are in a company, there's only a few manager positions, and then you have a little bit of a higher level up, but in reality you have a lot of regular workers or employees who are doing a lot of the work. Of course, depending on the company, there's a different balance between work duties, of course, but when you actually look at the actual opportunities out there to make a certain amount of money, for whatever reason you have, there really isn't enough out there to support everyone. And I think that's something that we don't necessarily realize about, money when you think about being on that rat race to make a certain level of money. Now, obviously, there are some factors that I may not necessarily be thinking about, but, at least from a employee position and not necessarily from a, entrepreneurial type position, for those that want to be maybe a manager or rise up in the company, obviously there are only limited amount of spaces. And so when you look at even the MIT, I think it's the MIT kind of expense spreadsheet that they have, where they do kind of these calculations of how much living expenses cost and how much money you need to make in order to basically, have a decent amount of income and not necessarily be struggling. Well, their numbers are very, unrealistic. But I think obviously one of the main proofs of it is that it really shows how, companies are withholding money that should be going to employees. And it, I think, really shows how there is an admittance of saying that, there is not a balance, a correct balance, and especially laws or governance in place in regards to how much money the company brings in and how much they pay employees. And I think that, when the government, decides to turn a blind eye to, things like this, I think, obviously it really affects, a lot of things in this world. And I think this is why, Jesus really taught us a lot of different things about money. And I love how, God tells us that he can take care of us when we seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And when you look at the book of James, I think it really gives us some insight into what goes on in this world that we don't always think about. And I want to read that verse in the book of James. So it's James 5, chapter 5, verse 4. It says, "Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You have fattened your hearts as in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and you have murdered the just. He does not resist you. So even here, God is calling out how you have these people who withhold what they actually should be paying everyday workers. Now, in this particular example, James uses someone who is mowing fields, someone who's like a gardener, and different things like that. But I think you can obviously apply this to, all different jobs across the board, that, there is a misallocation of money, that's happening, and, we are suffering for it. And I think, when the Bible says money is the root of all evil, I think, there's not a good excuse for sin, of course, but, we see that, the downfall of our country, and I think obviously for many countries in history, has to do with something similar to this. Now, I know there's probably many different factors that play into the downfall of a society. I mean, let's say even if we were doing everything right, but we still rejected Jesus Christ, obviously things are not going to go well for that, person or nation. And so, even if we were getting paid, correct wages, I think that, I would probably be making a podcast on some other issue, of course. And so I think that's why, we have to definitely really put our priorities in order in issues revolving around money. And that, I do think that someone could possibly make it, as far as, having a decent income and, having, maybe a goal that they want to reach in regards to money. But obviously there is a lot to be said about, even where our pursuits lead us. For example, if you have a goal to, have $2 billion in your bank account, the Bible has a lot to say about that. And I think that, your priorities are really, not in the right place if you have a goal to be rich. Now, I know that there are different reasons why a person may, have money. It may be something that your parents left you. Maybe you sort of just have been a hard worker in some form or fashion, and it just comes with the territory. But I think what the Bible really points out is that there is a lot of sin and wrong things happening in regards to making more money. When you think about drugs and marijuana, and where does this stuff even, how does it even get into the United States, or how does it even get into some people's hands? And then you realize that the government is really turning a blind eye to a lot of this stuff, even though on the news they will try to say, like, hey, we're fighting it, but it's not reality. I talk about how, there's open prostitution going on in a city nearby where I live. And, the government just turns a blind eye to it, and it really shows you that there are certain things that people sort of consider sin or wrong, but then there's other things that people, really don't necessarily view as completely wrong, even though, God does view it as sin and wrong and something big enough to lead someone to hell. But yet people sort of have an acceptance of something, and it really depends on, what you're talking about. And so, I believe that as you get higher up, in these different organizations, there are wrong things that are happening. And hey, I can't necessarily say it's in every single organization, but, when you look at, I've heard in daycares, they just found in a New York City daycare, there was fentanyl, under the floorboards. And so it's like, when people live for money, their priorities are all out of whack. And so, I love how when we talk about keeping our eyes on heaven, I love how God is making a city of righteousness where righteousness dwells. And I believe, he solves the problems that we all can face in regards to money. Solomon says that whoever loves money never has enough. And so, let's say you do make it to, having a $200,000 yearly income, it will still feel as if you were broke in a way in some levels because you never have enough. Now, obviously, I think, some people can have a, big salary and not necessarily, have a love for money in the way that the Bible is describing it. But, it becomes clear how the devil is really trying to squeeze the life out of us and really force people to, sin and make poor decisions because they are in some sort of financial need or some sort of situation that they don't really see a way out of. And so I think one of those areas is money, where we sometimes start to worry about, living life, but yet having this sort of needs that need to be met. And so, some of these situations don't really make sense, and you can see how I know I've seen a few examples of this where even on Uber, I did a job similar to Uber, but you have these Uber drivers who, technically they make like, $80,000 a year, so to speak, where they're doing a lot of these trips and, they're getting the payment for these trips, but yet the company Uber is taking like, 50 to 70% of the paycheck. And when you think about it, it's only an app. That's the crazy part about the story is that, Uber provides the app and maybe they do some advertising and different things like that. But when you think about the whole company of Uber, it is really based out of the driver. It's the driver who is doing all the work of delivering the food, of driving the passenger. And, when you think about it, the CEO of Uber is not really involved in the main component of what makes the company Uber. And yet, I get that, hey, he should have maybe a little bit extra for, coming up with the service and, providing the overall service and user experience and different things like that. And, he may have had an initial investment, that of his own money that he maybe saved up or whatnot, or he got the loan out. And so, yeah, there are some, reasons why he should be paid a little bit more. But then there comes a time where, he's getting all of this extra income in, and it's not necessarily necessary. I said necessarily necessary. That's kind of weird, but it's not right when, maybe he's been paid back already his initial investment plus interest. Maybe he's already getting an income, but yet he has all this money going into his savings account. And in his mind, he's like, wow, I'm so successful. Look at all this money I have. And the thought never enters his mind, like, wow, don't you think that some of this money should be going to your employees? But yet he's sort of thinking, wow, I'm so successful. All this money's coming in. And he never thinks about, oh, I need to pay the people that are actually keeping this company going. I need to pay them. This money belongs to them. It's not just, supposed to be sitting in my savings account, and I'm using it to, buy ridiculous things. And so that same concept, I believe, happens with a lot of different businesses. Now, I'm not saying that, again, CEOs shouldn't be paid more than their employees, but, this short example really talks about how, there is a real problem when you have the people who are really the face of the company, the people who are really, making the company happen, they're not getting paid enough, and they're struggling to, make ends meet in their own life, or they have all this debt, credit card debt. And yet, the CEO or the people who are higher up, who I do believe they obviously play a, important role in the company, but yet and still, you have the people who are the face of the company, not getting paid enough. And so, I think this is just one example of, what's wrong with, many different systems of, society. And I don't think I'm saying, okay, don't work for Uber or don't work for, these companies. I'm more taking the stance of how, hey, we have to be okay with what we're making. And I believe God will work out all the other details of, what is going on in our life. But at the same time, even when you think about moving up to a higher position or a manager position, there really is only limited spots, when you really think about it. And then from the standpoint of all the money that is in the world, when I see these companies, people try to start these companies on, Shark Tank, and sometimes, they do kind of come off as successful, but when you really think about, some of the expenses that they have, people try to start these different companies, and, they may say, hey, my company made $1 million. We went from, making $100,000 in sales to $1 million in sales. And so, yes, I think that is sort of a lot, for a company. But at the same time, when you add in all the expenses that, it takes to run the company, you're really not making that much. And yet, you have these people like Shark Tank who are, um, advertising entrepreneurship, but there really isn't that much money out there when you think about even, there's only 8 billion people in the world. There has to be some limit to the money that is out there in the world, and obviously, people are, the governments are printing money, but I think sometimes when we think of money, we sort of think of it as, some sort of unlimited expense, and yet there is only a limited amount of money. And so we also have to consider, what may kind of be considered a conspiracy, but when you think about internet access, and people who are in charge of the internet, what if they decide that this company, even though it's your company and you feel like you have a good product, what if they decide that they don't want to give your website access to maybe all the people that are out there? You don't know it, but yet, they're divvying, maybe this other website who has a similar product, now they're making all the money because, when you search on the internet, you go to this particular product or company. And so I don't think that, we would ever, really think of that happening of, people who are controlling who they want to, get business or not. But I believe that is really happening, and when you think about even lottery winners, some people sort of have a conspiracy about that, but you sort of start to think that some of this is true. Like, when you think about actually going to the lottery and trying to win, now obviously I know that the odds of winning the lottery, because there are so many people, is pretty big, but when you think about, there is no way that they were just actually giving out millions of dollars to just random people who happen to win. I believe that one of the things that they do is they have an inside person who pretends to be a random person, but they sort of win the lottery and then they divvy up the money. And so I think there's a lot of stuff like that happening. And so I think one of the things that Jesus is telling us is that we can't play this rat race money game and, give into this and then also expose ourselves to the dark side of, what people are buying and selling, when talking about drugs, when talking about, sex, when talking about, different things like that, and so Jesus is saying, hey, don't set your heart on trying to be rich, because it's not worth it, and eventually God will take care of us, and I mean, just look at it. You can see how hard it is for anyone to be rich or to have a decent income. It doesn't make sense for America to sort of, have all these, kind of creativity to being prosperous. And yet you look at some of these other countries and you can see how they're struggling. Like, you can't find a decent job anywhere, and when you just assume that, man, there's no place for this person to go. Now, I do have my own thoughts on, sort of why that happens. I think it does have to do with, a person's ability to, receive Jesus, and, a nation's ability to, follow after God. And I think there's a lot of spiritual aspects to some of this stuff. But, when you see how some of these countries, even if a person had a good idea, even if a person, wanted to even work and find a good job, some of these places, they're so far gone that, you can't do anything. Like, when you look at places like Somalia, there's so many countries that, I think this is probably one of the reasons where it fuels, these outside countries' hatred of Americans. And I think what fuels some Americans' hatred for the government and, America is that you see just a James chapter 5 verse 4 mentality going on, where you have certain people who are managing all the other people, and it really obviously goes up to, a higher reason, but at the same time, you see that there are so many problems, and, some of these countries, the whole country is like a slum, even though our, we do have some poor looking apartments here in America, but it's like, these countries that you can see, pictures of, you realize, wow, there's no place for you to go for miles. People would literally have to, walk hundreds and hundreds of miles. And I think one of the things that the migrants, the people who, maybe are trying to come from Mexico, or even, I don't know, they say maybe Venezuela or some places, they don't realize that, there's still a shortage here, even though I do believe that you can sort of, have a better type of shortage in America for sure, and I think we should definitely be grateful, but, they don't realize that, there's not really a way to make it here either, unless you are probably doing something illegal, or unless maybe you, join the military or something, or obviously, there are opportunities with education and, different things like that. But even then, there are only limited spaces. There's not going to be, 5 managers at one company. There's no need for that. Even when you have maybe, 100 employees, you might have maybe 2 or 3 managers managing 100 people. And so, really, even when you see more and more people trying to come to America, this economy is not built, for all of that. And you look at, the prices of some of this stuff, where it doesn't even, make sense for the price to be that way. I know sometimes people are like, oh, I'm charging this amount because, I have my own expenses and different things like that. But when you look at, how, some of this stuff, for example, a home, the resources are technically free. You're only paying someone for their knowledge and labor. And, yeah, you kind of, need to find wood, or, need someone to build these different parts that make up building a home. But when you look at maybe charging rent, and you're charging, maybe $2,500 for a even decent living space, maybe not even the most luxurious place, but a decent, living space. And then when you look at, most of the jobs, again, going back to the point that there's only limited manager spaces, well, most of the jobs are just regular employee type entry level jobs that are making like $20, maybe $25, an hour, if you are, in a pretty good, that right there is probably one of the best, hourly wages you're going to find without maybe more skills and different things like that. And so you're pulling in maybe, what, hopefully $3,000 a month, if you're, really blessed. And so if you look at, rent being 2,500, 2,500, you only have $500 left over. And so for the government to see this and turn a blind eye to it, it's like, yeah, people all over the world, it makes sense, sort of the chaos that is erupting over these past few years of, I believe a lot of people are blind to it, for one, because I think, even the managers or the people who could possibly change, change direction as far as how they operate, they don't know, the struggle that maybe their employees are having, or they just don't care. And so, I highly doubt the CEOs of these companies are even concerned with what's happening with their employees or, other areas. A great example of this, amongst probably many examples, is, I just saw a video of a guy who worked at Burger King for 27 years. And, he never made enough to even buy a house. I'm assuming he rented an apartment and he had a family and, kids. And, when he was working 27 years, they finally kind of gave him a acknowledgement of like, wow, thanks for your dedicated service for 27 years. And they just gave him a little plastic baggie with some candy and, maybe a little thank you card. And that was it. The CEO didn't care, managers didn't care, and they look at some of these jobs like, oh, you're not really that important. We don't value you that much. You're less than us, even though, without the Burger King workers, they're more important than the managers sitting in the office, maybe, overseeing the, payments of, the water bill at, Burger King restaurant, or, overseeing, the different taxes, or, overseeing different things that incorporate maybe the building itself. But without, these workers, you wouldn't have people able to even come up to your Burger King to even order a sandwich. And lo and behold, they're trying to eliminate these guys too, and, get robots in there. So now, hey, I don't even have to pay, my employees. I'll get their money. The CEOs are saying, hey, I'll get their paycheck now. I'll make even more money. And all I have to do is make sure that, these robots are, working strong and healthy, and, maybe pay a little bit of a bill on, their maintenance, or, actually buying the robot itself. But after that, hey, I'll get all the paycheck that an employee would get. And so you see some of these crazy operations happening, and, it doesn't say that this man over 27 years, was ever promoted. He worked, I didn't really do extensive research on this guy, but, he worked there for 27 years, never promoted, stayed in the same position. And, it's crazy. Now, obviously, I think we should be content. Obviously that man was content to stay there, and, it didn't really matter to him too much. But I think what these managers and CEOs are taking advantage of is that we are content. We are living with what we have. And so they're taking advantage of our contentment, and they're saying, hey, if they don't make a big deal about it, we'll just keep paying them low wages. And even though they know it's wrong, hey, if I can find someone to work this job for the as lowest pay as possible, then I'm going to have them do that, even though technically it's not right. But that's okay to them. And I don't think actors sort of see how they're being infringed on too. You have OpenAI coming out with this text to video software where now you can create movies without even hiring an actor. Once they really get, good at creating this software. And so now you see the elimination of all these different positions and jobs. And when they get really good at robots, there's going to be nothing that a person can do that a robot can't do. And so whoever owns the robot, they're making all that money. And, what are we left with? What are the workers left with? And so even though, technology is advancing, at the same time, you see some big problems in regards to, the economy. And obviously, God has, that wrapped up. I think God, obviously has a solution to all of this. And I think, just like the Tower of Babel, God's going to push back when, people start to rise up. But, it's crazy. I think at one point we sort of thought, oh, wow, OpenAI, so cool, text, a computer able to, artificial intelligence is able to, chat with us and, do all these cool things. But then you realize that they're really just trying to take your job. They're really trying to figure out stuff. And it's crazy because even in tech companies, they started eliminating some jobs in the tech industry because, now they can create software that can even code itself. And so it's like, these people are really losing their mind. And, it's crazy, and so, I think that, hey, why even play the money game? It's really not worth your time, especially with the whole issue of the spiritual impact that pursuing money can have on your life. Jesus said it plainly. He said how hard it is for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. And so when you see what these people are doing, it's like, wow, where's the solution other than heaven? The solution is making a new heavens and a new earth where none of these people will be able to do what they have done here on this earth in treating people the way that they treat people. And so thanks so much, and I will talk to you on the next one. See ya.